Join me in warmly welcoming Father Antonio Spadaro.
A friend of mine from Italy, and his name is Antonio Spadaro. He's written many books about poetry, examining poetry. He's just a beautiful man. And he is a corresponding friend with Pope Francis. And Pope Francis has a great love of poetry. And he has since he was very, very young. And Antonio put together some of his essays and published them. And it's called Viva la Long Live Poetry, I think it means in Italian. Unfortunately, the book is in Italian with a little note from the Pope here and about the importance of poetry. But I'm hoping that someone will translate it and it'll be published in English. I'd be very interested to see what Pope Francis has to say about poetry. And, he has written things such as, he feels that poetry is like, it is like the revolutionaries' language. And so I met with Antonio and we spoke about, the importance of poetry and had a very nice breakfast.
It's a part of a long video she posted on Substack. I don't know if you know this social media. And that was quite a surprise because can you hear me? Yeah. Does it work? Yes. Does it work? Yeah. So, because I met her in New York in 3 weeks ago, and we had a 2 hours long breakfast. Talking together about poetry and also Pope Francis. So this interview is going to be published tomorrow in Italy in newspaper La Repubblica. It's one of the main newspaper in Italy. And so we shared a lot. I translated into English part of the writings of Pope Francis during our breakfast. And so she really she felt very engaged. So she told me that if English translation of the writings of Pope Francis will publish in English, she will write a preface. And so I was very taken and very delighted. And she also posted the cover of the book in her Instagram channel, and also Jessie, who is the daughter of Patti, did the same. So they're very involved in this kind of. So I translated for them in my poor English what Pope Francis said in order to let them enjoy the message. So I'm here for doing the same, not just for having breakfast for you or with you. That will be of course great, but also for sharing some ideas about the vision of Pope Francis about poetry. Do you see? Francis asked me during our second interview. I interviewed Pope Francis a couple of times. The first one was in 2013. The second one was in 2016. So in our second interview, he told me, do you see, as our conversation came to a close, the novel, literature, it reads the human heart. It welcomes desire, splendor, and sorrow. It's not theory. It teaches us to preach. It helps us understand the heart. Pope Francis has always had a passion for literature. Novels and poetry have accompanied him throughout his formation, drawing him ever deeper into what he once called the jumble of the human heart, a phrase borrowed from the Italian great novelist Alessandro Manzoni. In a 2009 interview when he was in Buenos Aires, He confessed that from a young age, la literatura me gustaba mucho. I liked literature very much. His earliest memories as a reader stretch back to childhood evenings, when his father would read aloud after dinner. Television had not yet entered their lives. As a young Jesuit, Jorge Mario Bergoglio taught literature at the Colegio de la Inmaculada Concepción, a historic Jesuit high school in Santa Fe. It was there that he began to see the creative experience as essential to the education of the soul. He was just 28 when he made what he would later describe as a somewhat risky decision. He was expected to teach the canonical works of Spanish literature, but his students resisted. They wanted to read the modernist poetry of writers like Garcia Lorca. So Bergoglio struck a quiet compromise. Classics like El Cid would be studied at home, while class time would be devoted to the authors his students loved. More importantly, he urged them to write. He was a professor of creative writing. In time, he arranged for Jorge Luis Borges to read a selection of short stories written by his students. And Bergoglio had a connection because the Borges secretary had once been his piano teacher. So Borges was impressed by what he read and even offered to write an introduction to the students' collection. It's interesting that some of his students decided to have a creative career. So some of them became poets, journalists. One of them became a director and performer in Germany. Another one is a very well-known cook in Washington, D.C. So, and this person told me that his family was, I mean, not a, I mean, they don't have much money to spend, but they decided anyway to send their children in the Jesuit school. And he blesses the money that his parents spent for letting him to enjoy the teachings of the Jesuit school, because he met Bergoglio and he said, he made me a free person. That really struck me. Also struck me the fact that one of his students, who is in Germany now as performer and director, has still with him the homework corrected by Bergoglio, and he showed me. It's interesting. He told me, I realized why, because making corrections, he also put some notes about the life of him. So he was able to understand the moment and the feelings of the life of his student. And he was used to write some personal notes. And that has been very dear to him. So he decided to keep with him even in Germany. So the experience that Bergoglio had when he was professor, teacher in the high school still resonates today. I was particularly struck by the fact that Francis chose to write a preface to the poems of a young writer, Luca Milanese, who is an unknown poet. We have no trouble reading a papal text alongside the work of a poet who has become deeply embedded in the culture and sensibilities of entire generations, especially when the poet is from centuries past, like Dante. Bergoglio has done this himself, but never had a pontiff written an introductory page for the work of a young contemporary poet. In his preface, the Pope observes that Milanese's poetry stems from a natural ability to perceive connections, even where there seems to be none. It can uncover a new, deeper significance in what appears random. Poetry, in this way, reveals links, connections, and correspondences. From what I've heard from his students, Bergoglio, as a young professor, had a great passion for teaching Baudelaire, whom he has also quoted as a poet. Perhaps there is an echo of the symbolic richness in Baudelaire's correspondence in his reflections on Milanese's work. Equally significant was a choice Bergoglio made many years earlier, on June the 20th, 1981, when he was still a priest. He wrote the preface to the Destierros y Moradas of Exiles and Dwellings, a collection of poems by the Argentine Jesuit Father Osvaldo Paul, who lived in his community. In it, Francis, the then Father Bergoglio, offers a luminous definition of poetry. He wrote, "The poetic word has dwellings of flesh in the human heart, and at the same time feels the weight of wings that have not yet taken flight." It's a powerful image. Poetry for Francis is not a detached or ethereal pursuit. It's deeply incarnate. It absorbs emotions, passions, and the physicality of desire. For this reason, its weight is not like that of wings which once aloft are no longer felt. Instead, poetry feels the weight because its wings still touch the earth. This is how it expresses itself. Why this passion for poetry? Why this attentiveness, even to verses from young students or from poets overlooked by the critical canon? Because Francis understands something crucial. Without imagination, faith falters. We lack the powerful images needed to imagine the truth we believe in. This is also why he cherishes popular piety. It is for him a treasure trove of enduring symbols, vibrant and deeply embedded in the collective imagination of a people. It is in the spirit that we should understand the appeal Francis made in his preface to La Trama Divina, Gesù in Controcampo, a divine plot, Jesus in reverse angle. I make an appeal, he wrote. In this time of crisis in the world order, of war, of deep polarization, of rigid paradigms and grave challenges at the climate and economic level, we need politicians, we need economists, we need the genius of a new language, powerful stories and images, writers, poets, artists, capable of shouting the evangelical message to the world, of making us see Jesus. This is a very strong statement in favor of the power of poetry, the power of language. His call did not go unheard. Among those moved by it was the well-known filmmaker Martin Scorsese. So when the Pope wrote these sentences, This is a preface. He decided to write the preface of a book I wrote on Jesus. So this is part of the preface. So when I read it, I found it so powerful, and I sent it to Martin Scorsese. And after 2 weeks, he sent me back an email saying, I read what the Pope wrote, and I felt him as a message for me, as a person, as a movie maker. So I don't know how to, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a philosopher. I don't know how to answer using those languages, but I'm a movie maker, and I write screenplay, I'm a screenplay. So what I can do is to send to you a script of a possible movie on Jesus. So he took this words seriously, and so he's engaging on this movie. Now he wrote a second version of this screenplay, so we'll see. So he's going to be produce a new movie after the temptation, the last temptation of Christ about Jesus. So for Francis, imaginary is not a stylistic flourish or an expressive strategy, and just an expressive strategy. It's a way of thinking, a mode of thought. Speaking to the community of La Civiltà Cattolica on February the 9th, 2017, he clearly stated, I greatly enjoy poetry and continue to read it whenever possible. Poetry is full of metaphors. Understanding metaphors helps make thought agile, intuitive, flexible, and sharp. Those who have imagination do not become rigid. They possess a sense of humor and always enjoy the sweetness of mercy and inner freedom. Indeed, on many occasions as pontiff, he has drawn upon imaginary from poetry and continues to do so, even in his most significant documents. For example, in his apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia, dedicated to the conjugal love, Pope Francis feels compelled to use poetic language. In this context, he quotes Jorge Luis Borges, Octavio Paz, and Mario Benedetti. In another exhortation, Querida Amazonia, he references as many as 17 writers and poets, including many from the Amazon and popular traditions, as well as Mario Vargallosa and also Pablo Neruda. In his pontifical magisterium, Francis incorporates poetic and symbolic language as an integral part of his discourse. And this is a decidedly significant aspect. So with Francis is not a pope who just quotes poets in his documents, but he uses the poetic language for expressing his magisterium. And this is a big shift forward. I realized that I was at Fordham University when I met Padre Smith also. And we had a wonderful conversation with some bishops, and Bishop Stowe gave to me free pastoral document of the Bishop of Appalachia. So it's a regional bishop conference. And he was very proud because he showed me that those pastoral documents have been written like a poem, using even the form, the spaces, the use of language. I never seen something like that. So we should go deeper. The question is how poetry can convey the magisterium of the church using a different language than the language we are used to use for talking about theology, dogma, and so on. As the first Christians, I mean, the hymns we used to do. So probably we should get back there. And Francis, in his way, using Amazonic poets and local poets, even young poets, and also Dante, of course, is doing. And he did the same when he was Bishop of Buenos Aires. So it's not just a novelty of the new times of the last few years. So I sensed this early on during our very first interview in 2013 to explain the meaning of Christian hope. He didn't quote theologians or philosophers. He quoted Turandot by Puccini. I was struck when I heard Turandot. I said, "What?" And he replied saying, staring at me, "Turandot." Said, "What?" So I thought he was going to quote some theologians. And he also told me, over time, human beings change the way they perceive themselves. One thing is man or woman expressing himself or herself by sculpting the Nike night of Samothrace. Another is Caravaggio or Chagall or Dali. These are his words. Even the forms of expressing truth can be manifold. And this is necessary for transmitting the evangelical message in its immutable significance. The reference here is clearly not to abstract ideas, but to art itself, to the evolving forms through which truth becomes visible. Caravaggio, Chagall, Dali. There is a particular dimension of poetic expression that Bergoglio holds dear, as evident from his pedagogical choices as a teacher. I love tragic artists, Francis told me during our 2013 interview. On a couple of occasions, I have had the opportunity to continue my conversation with Pope Francis, delving into the world of literature. One name that often surfaced was Dostoevsky. I already knew that the great Russian novelist ranked high among Bergoglio's favorites, something he later confirmed in various settings, including during a press conference on his return flight from Bahrain. But which of Dostoevsky's works speaks most deeply to him? I asked him directly, "What do you like about Dostoevsky?" And without hesitation, he replied, "Notes from Underground." And in a later conversation during our 2016 interview, he referred to it as a gem. And this is exactly the same book referred by Martin Scorsese. So Taxi Driver is Notes from Underground. So it's interesting how these two guys like the same book by Dostoevsky. Let me focus for a moment on what this preference reveals, specifically Francis' deep appreciation for tragedy as testimony to the richness, complexity, and contradiction of human experience of life. He is drawn to tensions to what the theologian Romano Guardini, another major influence on Bergoglio, called polar oppositions. Guardini himself was a brilliant reader of Dostoevsky. In Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky writes that perhaps 2 times 2 makes 5. Because 2 times 2 equals 4 is no longer life, gentlemen, but the beginning of death. It's a powerful line, one that captures how Francis understands reality. 2 times 2 makes 5. Because 2 times 2 equals 4 is no longer life, gentlemen, but the beginning of death. Life cannot be grasped through rigid logic, abstract systems, or mechanical calculations. Life is messy, unpredictable, full of paradox. Indeed, a fundamental aspect of Bergoglio's thinking is that reality always precedes the idea and the complexity of the polyhedron with its many faces. So the complexity of the polyhedron, which is a figure, he likes a metaphor, he likes a lot, transcends the equidistant but abstract uniformity of the sphere. So the polyhedron against the sphere. He has a polyedric vision of life, which is never like a sphere. This way of seeing may well owe something to Dostoevsky and certainly to Guardini. The German thinker admired how Dostoevsky's characters lived between extremes, suspended in tension. The moment of fullness of existence, he wrote, the undefined fluid element that escapes all form, the sudden and unpredictable. This strikes me as a crucial key to understand Francis, for the break with rigid logic proposed by the great Russian writer can also be seen as a foundation of what Francis, in 2013 interview, described as incomplete thinking or open thinking, a mode of thought free from rigidity. Francis shared a sentiment in a conversation with the Jesuits of La Civiltà Cattolica. He quoted a verse by Baudelaire on Rubens. Yes, Baudelaire, the poet he taught with care to his students. He said, life is always flowing and moving. Baudelaire wrote, like the air in the sky and the sea in the sea. La vie afflue et s'agit sans cesse, comme l'air dans le ciel, la mer dans la mer. Life is always flowing and moving, like the air in the sky and the sea in the sea. And Francis added, yes, life is fluid and constantly in motion, as air moves in the sky and the sea within itself. It's not a black and white painting. It's colorful. Some colors are bright, others dark. Some are gentle, others vivid, but shades always predominate. It's precisely to these shades that discernment applies. Francis recently quoted Gerard Manley Hopkins for the Jubilee of the Artists. He said in this homily for the Mass of the Artists, as the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. The mission of the artist is to discover this hidden greatness and reveal it, making it perceptible to our eyes and hearts. The same poet also perceived the leaden echo and the golden echo in the world. Artists are sensitive to these resonances, and through their work, they engage in discernment about the various echoes of the events of this world and help others to do the same. So the leaden echo, the golden echo, which are a different way of talking about desolation and consolation. The leaden echo, desolation, the golden echo, consolation. And artists are sensitive to these resonances, and through their work, they engage in discernment. So the artist is a person who is able to make discernment, to capture the emotions, and on these motions, you can make a discernment. During the same 2013 interview, when we spoke about Jesuit identity, he confessed something important. He found it difficult to speak about the society of Jesus in abstract terms. When you clarify, he said, when you clarify too much, you risk misunderstanding. It's interesting. The notion of knowledge he has. When you clarify too much, you risk misunderstanding. The Society of Jesus can only be truly understood through narrative. It is within narrative, rather than through abstract philosophical or theological explanation, that discernment takes place. While discussion plays a role in the process, the Society's style is not rooted in debate, but in discernment. This path resists fixed boundaries. It is marked by a mystical openness that never claims to fully resolve or complete thought. A Jesuit, therefore, must be someone of incomplete thinking, of open, unfinished thought. In this, I believe, lies the full weight Bergoglio places on narrative, is the privileged space for discernment, precisely because it's not governed by balance and calculation, but by openness and depth. Speaking at the Pontifical Gregorian University, Francis asked the question, are you considering the impact of artificial intelligence on teaching and research? No algorithm can replace poetry, irony, and love. He insisted that students must rediscover imagination. Students, academic students, so they have to rediscover imagination, feel the birth of inspiration, connect with their emotions, and learn to express their feelings. And in his recent encyclical Dilexit Nos, he reiterated the point. He wrote, in the age of artificial intelligence, we cannot forget that poetry and love are necessary to preserve our humanity. Nice, great. Nice music. So in 2024, Francis took this message forward. He wrote two letters expressing his vision of poetry and literature along the lines I have described so far. So two letters. The first letter, published in early August 2024, emphasized the vital role of literature in education. The second one was addressed directly to poets and appeared in an anthology of religious poetry encompassing works from various eras and faith traditions. Originally intended for the formation of priests, Francis ultimately chose to address the first letter to a broader audience. In it, he appears to draw from his own experiences as both a reader and teacher of literature. The first lines Francis wrote in the letter is that, I'm going to quote him, in moments of weariness, anger, disappointment, or failure, when prayer itself does not help us find inner serenity, a good book can help us through the storm until we find peace of mind. Time spent reading may well open up new interior spaces that help us to avoid becoming trapped by a few obsessive thoughts that can stand in the way of our personal growth. There's something weird here. When prayer itself does not help us find inner serenity, wow. It's a Pope who wrote that. In a letter, an official letter. When prayer itself, did you ever done this kind of experience when prayer is not able to help you to find inner serenity? It's an interesting experience. So for the Pope, poetry might go beyond prayer in a mysterious way. The message, anyway, is clear. Our humanity, and especially our pastoral sensibility, cannot be fully formed without direct engagement with storytelling and inspiration. Formation, he argues, has become overly abstract, disconnected from the depth of and complexity of lived spirits. We have lost the richness of language, reduced to repeating familiar formulas. Our words have grown flat along with our imagination. Publishing this letter was a bold and deliberate act. Francis recognizes that literary texts open up an inner space of freedom, one that protects us from becoming trapped in a few obsessive ideas that inexorably imprison us. Such a space, he writes, can open even when we cannot find calm for the soul, not even in prayer. Literature is deeply connected to what each of us seeks in life, as it engages closely with our real experiences, core tensions, desires, the search for meaning. Desire is central to our spiritual lives, just as it is to our experience of literature. We all have desires, and they unite us. How often, while reading prose or poetry, have we found ourselves in a space where our desires could surface freely, drawn in by a story, character, or line that resonated deeply? How often have we felt that the writer's words express our own thoughts and feelings more clearly than we ever could? It's as if the page we are reading is reading us. For Francis, reading novels and poetry is far more than simply entertainment. It's a profound means of exploring the depth of the human soul and gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves and others. A good book, he says, opens the mind, touches the heart, and prepares one for life. This process of openness and insight is, in his view, essential to the human experience. Three core elements of his argument stand out clearly. Firstly, Francis emphasizes the concept of experiencing reality. For him, reading literature, whether novels or poetry, is not simply an intellectual exercise, but a genuine encounter with life itself. It is above all about feeling, observing, and entering into situations with emotional and moral attentiveness. This relationship with reality is vital, especially in the context of faith. Reading opens both the mind and the heart, sharpening our awareness of the world. It becomes, in Francis' words, a training ground to exercise our sight, allowing us to see through others' eyes. Reading literature is akin to listening to another person speak, an act that requires openness, attentiveness, and receptivity. These are essential human capacities that allow us to be touched by the lives and experiences of others. Stories broaden our experiential horizon. Through them, we are invited to live realities we might otherwise never encounter, whether joyful or painful, familiar or distant. We are drawn into the lives of characters, and through them, we become more attuned to the struggles, hopes, and desires of others. Poetry, too, plays a vital role. It teaches us to find words for our experiences, to name them, and in doing so, to deepen them. Francis reminds us that the Gospels themselves are stories. The flesh of Christ is not abstract. It is composed of passions, emotions, feelings, and lived, concrete narratives. The very act of storytelling in its concreteness draws us into an encounter with a Jesus Christ made flesh, made human, made history. Secondly, and consequently, creativity, according to Francis, belongs not only to writers, but to readers as well. So there is a creating act of reading. In his letter, he even claims that the reader becomes a co-author, rewriting the work, expanding it with their imagination, and constructing a world through their own faculties, memories, dreams, and personal histories, rich with drama and symbolism. As a result, what emerges from this process often differs significantly from the author's original intention. Reading, then, is not simply absorbing content, as though we are empty boxes into which meaning is placed. Rather, it is an act of recreation, of rewriting what the author has written and becoming authors ourselves. It's like a musical score. Without someone to perform it, it doesn't exist. And every performance brings something new. Thirdly, reading intertwines with desire. Literature speaks to what we long for in life. This is a subtle but powerful idea. It suggests that reading is fundamentally an act of discernment, one that helps us better understand ourselves, our desires, and the meaning of our lives. Reading becomes a kind of spiritual exercise, engaging both mind and heart, and inviting the reader on an inner journey. Through this journey, we cultivate discernment and deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Francis draws directly on Marcel Proust here. He quotes a couple of times Marcel Proust. If we don't read, it's like taking photographs without ever developing them. Literature allows us to develop the raw images of our experiences, bringing to light what would otherwise remain hidden or incomplete. So I recommend you to read this letter because it's kind of a manifesto of literary theory, seen from an Ignatian point of view. It's very strong, it's very beautiful. I just summarized it for you in 3 points. But there is another letter, the letter to poets, addressed to the poets. It was a speech he gave to a group of Georgetown University and La Civiltà Cattolica, because with Mark Bosco also we organized a beautiful conference with 42 poets from all around the world. I invited Marcus Scorsese, who came, and so all of us met the Pope, and he gave a wonderful speech. Then I published a book collecting poetry from all religious traditions and of all times, a big book with an anthology of this poet. And I asked him for a preface, and he said he took the speech he gave to Georgetown La Civiltà Cattolica, to the 42 poets, and then he rewrote it a little bit, saying, this is exactly what I feel to say. So he readdressed the same talk as a letter to the poets. So he offered in 3 points of reflection here. First, the poet is an eye. There are 3 images in this letter. The poet is an eye. Poets observe reality while simultaneously dreaming. They see more deeply, they prophesy, they reveal an alternative way of perceiving what lies right before our eyes. In this sense, poetry challenges the imagination. It doesn't simply affirm our usual analytical approach to interpreting the world. Similarly, the gospel, with its blend of realism and visionary force, is, as Francis puts it, in an artistic challenge. he defines the gospel as an artistic challenge and therefore prophetic. It enables the church to, I'm going to quote Pope Francis, protest, summon, and cry out. And echoing here, miłusz. Second, the poet is a voice. So the poet is an eye, the poet is a voice that speaks, sings, and cries out the anxiety of humanity. Art becomes fertile ground for giving expression to life's polar oppositions, social tensions, inner struggle, and the contradiction of existence. Bergoglio writes, there are aspects of life that we sometimes fail even to comprehend, and for which we cannot find suitable words. Here, the poet lends a voice, unconventional and non-confirming, to these inexpressible realities. So a poet has an eye, a poet has a voice. The poet serves also as a gateway to the imagination, as a bridge, helping it to move beyond the narrow confines of the self, inviting it to embrace the complexity and richness of reality through the genius of a new language, as I told you before, powerful stories and images. Poetry helps us reimagine our lives, our histories, and our future. This is true also of our experience of God, an experience Francis describes as always overflowing. The verb that he likes the most in Spanish is desbordar. Desborde is the name. Desbordar, which means to go out of the border, literally. No? So overflowing. Francis wrote, you cannot contain it. Speaking about the experience of God. You cannot contain it. You feel it, and it goes beyond. It constantly overflows. The experience of God, like a basin, continually filled with water that eventually spills over. For this reason, we must heal our imagination from anything that domesticates Christ, anything that reduces image to something merely decorative, framing it and hanging it on the wall. Thank you for your service, Francis tells the poets, underscoring that poetry itself is a vital service to humanity. Thank you for your service. I'd like to close by sharing a personal note now. A handwritten letter I received from Francis on January the 20th, 2025, a couple of weeks before he went to the hospital. So he wrote, so he didn't send the letter through, the courier, but he wrote by himself. In response to the book that Francesca showed you, allow me to read this letter to you, very brief, but very dense. Dear brother, long live poetry. This is why the book. So we changed the proof. For printing it, for having this title. This is beautiful. Long live poetry. I'm delighted that you have compiled the text I have written over these years about poetry's significance. I sincerely wish poetry could occupy a prominent place in our universities. It's a strong statement. Of course, he's speaking about our university, means Catholic University, Pontifical University, but it's even stronger. It's even stronger. I sincerely wish poetry could occupy a prominent place in our universities. We must rediscover a taste for literature in our personal lives and in education, or we risk becoming like a shriveled fruit, dry fruit, shriveled fruit. Interesting as an image, right? We don't want to be like a dried fruit. We don't want to be dry. Well, I like dried fruit, but I mean, yeah, but it's a shriveled fruit. Poetry help us, all of us, remain human, and we need this very much today. Francis, thank you.
Paul is already, thank you to say how wonderful it was and these insights that he gave us in those idea of poetry, reading, and human and personal growth. Now, if anyone has got questions, please help me. Then I'll ask you one.
Thank you so much. The encyclical with the boldest, most daring language must be Laudato Si. No, Laudato Si, Laudato Dei. It's much fiercer, prophetic, challenging. How can we follow in those footsteps and find the poetic language that moves the people around us, particularly in this overdeveloped world, to wake up their relationship with each other and nature, that we feel part of nature and we give back to nature? Where can we find that generosity of spirit? Where will we find that language? Because I'm not hearing it anywhere in the Jesuit community.
Oh, I don't know. My experience is really different in Italy. I don't know how to explain that. I mean, the Laudato Deum begins saying that the world is falling apart, which is a pretty strong statement, which is unusual for France. So we realize that the world, we are living in a very bad situation, and in a situation in which the world disorder is not enabling us to find the right solutions. He's appealing, he's conveying messages to the leaders of the world, of course, but saying that exactly this, living the tensions we live in, considering the world disorder, we need a new language. Because we don't know even how to give name to the situation we are living. We lack the words, the right words to say that we are living. Do you remember the images of so-called Gaza resort made by Donald Trump? Have you seen the conversation between Trump and Zelensky? The conversation between Trump and Zelensky had nothing to do with the classic diplomacy, traditional diplomacy. It was a peace appeal. So the New Yorker defined President Trump as a producer in chief, which is true. I mean, they are able to, this kind of people are able to do the nerve. The Vice President of the United States runs his great rival. He wrote a wonderful novel. It became a Netflix movie, very successful. So the Pope is right. We need narratives. We need poets. We need stories. Because stories are the only, building stories is the only way for conveying a message. And this is a strong statement. Consider, for example, that when the video, which was a joke, that was made, relevant by Donald Trump itself, because the beginning, that video was just a joke. for making fun of Trump, but Trump made it real because he posted on his own channels. And exactly when Donald Trump spread out the images of the so-called Gaza resort, Pope Francis started calling from without voice the Vice of Gaza. So without responding, without indignation, without responding to that narrative, he built another narrative. So he's a storyteller. And we need to be storytellers. We need to be poets. And the poets, as he said, is a language of props. This is what we need desperately. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not going to give attention in this today, but is there anything has the Pope asked anything about conversion in court?
But like, I don't know. Never, Pope Francis never contacted that correctly with me. I don't know if he's aware of his writing or not. But anyway, yeah, it's in what he said, I feel the echo of the reading response theory. I'm not saying that I studied the reading response theory, but it's very close to the Ignatian way of reading a book. So what Umberto Eco wrote is very similar to the intuitions of Ignatian of Loyola those times, because it's the same way to read the book. So for Ignatius, without a reader, the book doesn't exist at all, because you need to interact with the book. And the interaction makes the book real. So it's the opera aperta, as the Umberto Eco used to say in Italian. That's true. I mean, reading is open to possibilities. This is another interesting point because we are used to probabilities. So we based on life, our life is based on what is probable. But the spiritual reading helps us to understand that there is a real which is much broader than probabilities, and its possibilities, and evidence, I well and possibilities. Even fact has been more this the same.
I thought it was wonderful to hear you, especially describe as a bit of the quote. I've been really taking just a little bit of a slightly, but I think with this use of the word closeness, and more, it seems like it's almost cascading out of them over the last 2 or 3 years. This idea of closeness, and he even said when he came out of the hospital, I want to thank you for your closeness. Could you unpack that word for us from your perspective of knowing the Pope and understanding? Is that, I would say it's not really an American idiom, so it sounds strange to an American boy.
Yes. Well, he likes to touch people, to feel the other. Because if you don't feel the other, you don't have a real relationship. So being close is not just a theoretical thing, it's very practical. So for him, touching is a very relevant feeling. The sense of having somebody close to you, or means that you feel a physical closeness. Which is very close to the Ignatian spirituality, because in the spiritual exercises, Ignatian speaks about touching places, and tasting also, but touching, with closeness, to touch, physically touch. So is not a theoretical way of contemplating, it's a very practical, physical way of staying in touch with reality and the other. It's not aggressive at all. It's a way of listening. It's a way of being aware of the presence of the other. And it's interesting because also in your prayer, you have to use your spiritual feelings. And so being close means touching reality.
Sorry, Francesca. There's a question on Zoom here, if I can jump in. John Woodhouse asks, how could we get poetry at the centre of our universities?
The center?
At the centre of our universities. How-
I don't know, it's up to you. This is a good question for all of you. I don't know, I'm starting kind of a dialogue. After I read a passage, a sentence, I realized that it was very serious. So, for example, Osservatore Romano, which is the official voice of the Vatican newspaper, started a conversation among the rector of the Pontifical Universities in Rome. So they already published two entire pages of the action of the rectors to that lines of Francis. So we need to start a global conversation because for Francis, poetry is something that has to do with all the sciences. It's not just an appeal to the literary department of our universities. No, it's a general into all of us. And considering that he was talking about the Pontifical University, it's also the theological faculties. So it's as if he said, theologians, you have to study poetry. You have to start to be very familiar with poetry. And it's a big challenge, I don't know. It's up to you to find a way of doing it.
Tony, thank you so much. It was really a joy to hear, and particularly as a great writer, as a theologian, to hear the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church so advocating the mystery and complexity that can be conveyed through poetry, and that element of uncertainty and giving it final importance. It's something to me that's been missing in the Protestant Church in terms of my own experience, these movements of theopoetics as a process and very needed in terms of social impact as well. That place of mystery that I just long for. I'm so glad to hear that that's coming out in English. Just that I long for that to have an impact on the Protestant Church as well. I just want to
Yes. I think, well, the Anglican tradition is, I mean, it's packed with great poets and a strong law of poetry. But what I can say something about the interreligious act, which is even broader, maybe more interesting. When I published this anthology of religious poetry, I realized that all the religions in the world felt need to express themselves in poetry. There isn't a religion in the world without poetry. So we made many presentations of this book, and one of them, the major one in Rome, for that presentation, I asked to be present to talk about this book with the preface written by the Pope. The Imam of the Great Mosque of Rome, a Jewish leader, and the president of the Hinduistic religion in Italy, who is a monk, and of course a Catholic representative. She was a Catholic pope. It was amazing, amazing. I consider that I organized meeting, the presentation, just after 1 year of the invasion of Gaza. So, and I had the great Imam of Rome and the leader of the Jewish community together, talking about poetry. And I realized that when the religious leaders get together, talking about poetry, there is heaven. I mean, no tensions at all. They agree with each other. They enrich. So, for example, the Imam, he said, now I'm going to read a passage of the Quran. Then he said, no, I cannot read it because Quran is made for, it's poetry, it has to be, it's a song, it needs to be sung. So I'm going to sing. And he started singing. That was beautiful. So poetry is the perfect place for religious, interreligious dialogue. So now, for example, an artist I know very well, as Michelangelo Pistoletto, probably some of you know him anyway. We are going to build a kind of manifesto of religions united by arts. So it's the other way around. It's not the art at the service of religions, as it was until now, but it's the religions who ask, knock at the door of arts for enabling them to be united in this particular time. It's pretty revolutionary.
Thank you very much. And only one question from me and a final comment. I heard you say some time ago that Pope was formed by literature.
Yeah.
And my question is the other way around. I mean, or is it the Pope as a Jesuit and trained in Ignatian spirituality that when he then was made closer to literature and so on. So is it literature only, or is it his Ignatian spirituality meeting?
I think both of them. I think both of them. So the spiritual, the Ignatian spirituality, you know, Jeremiah Hopkins had to suffer a lot from the Jesuits because they don't understand his poetry, right? But at the same time, the Ignatian spirituality, thanks to the spiritual exercises, enabled them to be very sensitive to the poetic work. So there are a lot of Jesuit poets, and there is a profound love of the Jesuits for poetry. At the same time, Bergoglio is Bergoglio, has his own personality, and he was formed by his relatives to watch movies, to do theater, to do poetry and novels. So I think
The final comment about universities, it would be very difficult probably, to just work around the system and so on. I wonder whether our communities, however, could become a place where poetry is in a way, I don't say taught, but offered kind of where narrative and growth. Of course, one needs to have support, but it's not only universities. We look for other places and other associations and so on, where that is possible.
yes, but still the statement is strong.
It's very long, that's why, you have an appeal to all of it, taking a decision.
Seriously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the stuff.